So before I left the house this morning, decided that the best way for me to handle this class so, to all of you, I want to thank you all for participating in this class. For me, it's been a tremendous amount of fun, excitement. I think we would agree that the polls left something to be desired. Those of you who have children or grandchildren who are thinking of going into the polling business, I suggest maybe they think about an alternative. But in any event, we actually had, for those of you who came a little later, we had Hillary's concession speech on shortly, about 15, finished about 10 to 12, and I think it was most appropriate. It was gracious, as Mr. Trump's speech was last night, and hopefully we will move beyond this. I think there are a lot of questions about that, but I think at this point we need to give everyone the benefit of the doubt and hope that this will be behind us now. So cheers. So last night, or this morning actually, I didn't do it last night, I had an agenda prepared yesterday before I was at the polls, working, and then counting. But when I got up this morning, I tore up that agenda, and then I decided really that this is a time not for lots of speeches, but really for us to try and ascertain what happened and some reasons why. We're going to hear a lot about that. Those of you who were able to get through X number of hours last night heard a lot about it from people who didn't know much to start with and frankly knew less, I think, last night. And a lot of palaver, and there's going to be a lot more. There'll be, I think there are at least 8 or 10 books that I can see coming out of this election from all sides. And a lot of fingers to be pointed, and a lot of people who will claim to know the reasons why we have wound up where we are. But in any event, so I called my rabbi, my minister, my priest, my imam, my psychiatrist. None of them are available. And so you're going to have to live just with me. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on the numbers. Remember, we had decided that we were going to try and have a bonus session next week. That's still on the agenda if you want to continue to concern yourself with these matters. A week from Friday, the 18th. So before we leave today, we need to make that decision. But if we come back on that day, I think we'll have better information in terms of the numbers, and we'll be able to spend a little time talking about that. Not all of the time, but some of the time. But I would like to, the agenda, which I put up here is, we know who won, so I think the first question really is, what happened? And so I'd like to kind of open it up and let you make comments as to what you think happened Then we'll get into a couple of other, some of these actually overlap. Where do we go from here? What does it mean for each of the parties? I think these are some very interesting questions. By the way, I'm planning on doing a course in the spring, not in the winter, but in the spring, on the first 100 days, basically, which will get into some of these. We'll know more then about where the parties are going, where Mr. Trump is going, whether Newt Gingrich is really going to be Secretary of State, and other interesting questions like that. So, what happened? What's your take on all of this? Yes?
I think there was greater, a couple things. One, I think Comey's affected and brought out the hatred of the Clintons was stronger than anticipated. And I think that Trump tapped into an anger in the country that most politicians weren't aware of how big it was, how deep it was. But my concern was he's going to get rid of the swamp. They elected all the same people to go back to Washington. And so
well, I think that's a fair question. I'm going to let you all talk, but there's one thing. As I turned around, I missed the words that we've had on the board now for some weeks: change, crisis, turning. Remember, the very first thing we talked about in the very first session was that never in the history of this country has one party, won the popular vote in 6 out of 7 elections. I'm here to tell you it actually may happen. Hillary may win the popular vote. And it's very close at this point.
They said she won it this morning.
Did they?
Yes.
So that means, this is a question which, I haven't been now listening for the last 12 hours, but that means that in 2 of the last 5 elections, 2004, 8, 12, 16, 2 of the last 5 elections, the person who has won the national popular vote has lost the election. And that is a very interesting problem that we need to, I say we, I think the country needs to evaluate and consider. So anyway, the change issue, I think, was critical. Turnout, that really revolves around the numbers. I think to the point that was made here earlier, just now, clearly what Mr. Trump was able to do yesterday was to bring a very large number of voters from exurban and country areas throughout the United States. If you look at the map, there's a sea of red in the center and in the south, and some blue areas on the coast, and a couple up top. And while that, key states, Pennsylvania, obviously Wisconsin, as it turned out, Michigan is still in flux, or at least it was an hour ago. And New Hampshire is still in flux, interestingly enough. And Maggie, the last I saw, was a couple of hundred votes ahead. I think we're going to see a recount there. No idea how that's going to turn out, but if it does turn out that she wins, then the Senate will be, the Democrats will have, I guess, 48 votes there. Andrea?
What I found fascinating last night was I was watching CNN, and I don't know how many of you were watching CNN, but they had this map that you could look at Michigan, for example, but then you could dive down into counties or cities and look at whether they had voted Democratic or Republican in the past, but how it was turning out based on rural versus cities, and I thought that was really quite interesting.
Yes. No.
It's
Yeah.
interesting that Trump has won several key states by just a few thousand votes.
Yes.
100,000, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania.
Yep. No. Some of the votes were very close.
So it wasn't a landslide. But the second thing that struck me, Clinton was spending a lot of the time in the battleground states, Ohio, Florida, North Carolina, and didn't pay attention to her home states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and that, with hindsight, that may have been a mistake.
Francis?
So I grew up in Michigan, and my younger sister, when Trump had that rally at midnight in Grand Rapids, they went over and they couldn't get in. There were thousands and thousands of people there. And I wonder if the fact that the media is, in my view, very pro-Clinton, misled people as to what might eventually happen and didn't really realize. I mean, at midnight, there were thousands of people who couldn't get into that arena.
Let me, fair question, let me just say Francis's comments reminds me that, remember we took that poll last week, and the winner of that poll was Francis Free. So we congratulate her. She picked Mr. Trump, and she had the highest number of electoral votes for Mr. Trump. Actually, Trump got more, but Francis did win. So there's a very large bonus check coming your way. I'm not sure. You'll get a certain percentage of whatever I get at the end of the year.
I think one of the things that interested me was the down ballot effect. Okay, change. If you look at New Hampshire,
Yep.
when I left New Hampshire, it was blood red, and I went to Wisconsin, it was brilliant blue. Okay, let's change that so. But if you look at just our local elections in New Hampshire, Martha Hennessy won, I think, by 11 votes against someone, she's our new state senator, who never campaigned. Annie Custer had an opponent whose name I still don't remember, did nothing, never saw an ad, came within 2 percentage points. And we had talked earlier about the effect down ballot. When I first was going to go to bed, the Pennsylvania had switched to, is it McGinty or something?
Yeah, McGinty.
And then by the time Trump took Pennsylvania, she had lost. So it's very interesting to see the impact of his vote on places that, I mean, people who didn't campaign almost won.
Yeah. Okay, those of you, yes, Sam.
Well, as somebody that followed economics all my life, it seems to me that in the end, economics was a big, big factor. What really got people bugged is their economic certainty. In the Rust Belt is where Hillary had to win, and they didn't. And the Rust Belt was feeling that pain pretty badly.
So the Rust Belt, and again, early in the, somewhere in the middle, we talked about those states. We talked about that message, bringing, and Mr. Trump has said he was going to bring coal mining back to Pennsylvania. He was going to bring manufacturing jobs, specifically in the steel business, back to Youngstown. He's going to bring automobile jobs back to Michigan. They're already actually in Michigan in a big way. Query, is anybody going to be able to bring those jobs back? I think that's a nice question. One of the most important blue-collar jobs in this country today are truck drivers, both men and women, who deliver goods from one section of the country to the other. These people make anywhere from $70,000 to $90,000 a year or more. That's a very decent pay for the job they do. People who are knowledgeable in this say that in 5 years, most of these jobs will be gone because these trucks are going to be automated. Scare you a little. And these people will be out of work. McDonald's is now working on robots so that when you go up to the window, I don't know what you're going to see, but you're going to see something come out with a burger or whatever else it is. So those kinds of jobs are going away. And so the real question is not whether coal mining jobs should come back to Pennsylvania. Those jobs aren't coming back. But it is important that the people who were in those jobs or whose family was in those jobs and haven't been able to replace them find jobs, in fact, that they can do. And that is the challenge that both parties face. Because just saying that they're coming back doesn't make it so. So, yes?
Regarding the Electoral College, did the founders decide on that? I know they wanted each state had to have
The founders decided that
senators.
electors would be a part, in other words, that the electors would be the ones who vote for president and vice president.
I know, but why? I mean, the 2 senators from each state were supposed to, you know, make it more equitable for everybody.
Well,
The
among other
electors,
things,
that
they
doesn't make sense.
didn't trust the people in the colonies to cast their votes. And at that time, the only voters were white males who had property. So it was a very small number of people. And in fact, in the first 4 or 5 elections, there are no recorded popular votes. Washington, Adams, Jefferson, there were no recorded popular votes during that time. It was the electors who were selected by the state legislatures who made that decision.
Well, I think that since demographics have changed so much, that system should change.
Well, I think there are a lot of people who would agree with you. George?
I think the result proves that Trump was right. The system is rigged.
Yes.
Back to your original point, we faced very similar circumstances when we went from the agricultural to the manufacturing, to the industrial age. That's where we are right now. We're going from the industrial age into a high-tech age. This country has not made those sacrifices, has not trained those workers to make that transition. So a lot of it is our government, the fault of our government, and the fact that this government cannot work together. And you've got to blame the very party that has stopped things from happening in this government for the last 8-10 years.
Who might be?
Yes, Emma.
I thought last night and this morning about the fact that to a large degree, both Trump and Bernie were speaking to the same crowd and having, you know, much of the same message, variations on the theme, of course. But I wondered, you know, in the event that Bernie had actually been our candidate, would he have fared better?
Well, what do you think about that? Yes.
Well, I just heard a couple of people chuckle about Bernie, but people chuckled about Trump.
They did.
And we have 2 people, totally different ends of the spectrum, but attracted the same people. And I truly believe that the Democrats have left their constituents out of flapping in the wind. They've become too elitist, and he was touching a nerve, Bernie was. And I think that he would have continued. They would have painted him as a communist and all this kind of stuff. You know, I could just hear Trump, oh, that commie. You know, of course, then he loves Putin, but that's another story. But I really feel very passionate about the point that Bernie would have definitely brought in. Look at the rallies. There's a 74-year-old man filling stadiums with young people and making them believe that there was something there for them. She didn't do that.
Yes.
Okay, well, polls at the time when Bernie and Hillary were going head-to-head during the primaries, polls at the time predicted that he would fare better against Trump than Hillary would, and that was poo-pooed on the talk shows, that they didn't believe those polls.
Mm-hmm.
And just another interesting thought, and that is that Trump, one thing he absolutely is not is an absolutist. He doesn't seem to have really strong ideological convictions, which may, oddly enough, enable him to work both ways across the aisle, because he is not really a committed
John?
In the end, it may have more to do with what we're talking about here than Trump overperforming. He actually got fewer votes than one. We're on track to run, it's under 120 million votes.
Yes.
When we walked in here.
Well, it'll be close to 100.
Okay, but there was like 127 4 years ago, and even more 8 years ago. So he got less than Romney. The difference was Hillary got way less than Obama got in 4 years ago, never mind 8. So everything we're saying, I think, is going to be part of the post-mortem, because she did not, and obviously all of her surrogates did not do the trick.
Well, let's follow that just for a sec. I mean, it's, you know, Obama and Michelle and, you know, Biden, you know, couldn't have done much more.
Bernie.
I mean, Bernie, you know, I mean, at the moment, I mean, you know, Obama's favorability rating is at, I don't know, 56, 57%. That's higher than Reagan's was in the last year of his presidency. And yet, it clearly didn't carry over.
It obviously doesn't transfer. And everybody, I mean, she obviously was very unpopular with a large slice of the country.
Yep.
And the numbers reflect it.
Yes.
How big a role do you think sexism played in that?
Yes.
A lot.
A lot.
Well, you know, how big a role do we think sexism played in this? So, is that sexism or the reverse of sexism? You know, you're talking about because she was female, or because of his, you know, attitudes. I mean, I think that clearly there were some people, I think the number I saw this morning is that Trump got close to 40% of the female vote. So I have to just say, to me, that's UFB. That's absolutely unbelievable to me. But, you know, 40% of the women, you know, thought that was the right thing to do. And were perfectly happy, obviously, to do that. So, while she won 60% of the women, you know, you would have thought that she would have done much better. And she didn't. So, yes.
I think we need to keep in sight the fact that there were very little policy discussions. There were very few policy issues.
Right.
This is a personality election. And I think if we start at the beginning, we had, on the Democratic side, the decision was made after Obama won in 2008 that Hillary was going to be the next candidate. The DNC was structured that way, with staff. As all the things come out, we know that the party had decided that Hillary missed with in 2008, so she was going to be the next one. All the messages that come out, the comments, Bernie didn't get a fair share. That was pretty much set. The Democratic voters perhaps were not included in that. On the Republican side, it was going to be the 17 midgets or whatever they used to call them. Everybody that was part of the center, they were going to take over because that's who the Republican National Committee was. Then all of a sudden, Trump comes along. So that's how we got started. And in the campaign, it was all personalities. It was. I haven't heard anybody agree with any of or disagree with any of the specifics that either of them presented, because what they presented were political stories. Hillary didn't. Hillary was not liked by a lot of people. And there were women who I've talked to who said they'd love to have a woman president, but they're not sure that they felt that Hillary represented their interests.
Yes, Martin?
Maynard, this is not intended to sound like sour grapes, but what really has impacted my thinking is when people evaluated Trump's character and his temperament and his suitability to be commander-in-chief. I'm not talking about Democrats. I don't care what Hillary said. I don't care what any Democrat said. When the leaders of the Republican Party deemed him to be unsuitable temperamentally and otherwise, it's like had absolutely nothing to do with anything. It's just the public wanted change and they're getting change, but I mean...
Change was the name of the game. Remember, we asked a question a couple of weeks ago. I think the specific question is Trump bulletproof? And we had a discussion about that. And I think the answer to the question is, yeah, he was, and he is. All of the things that happened in the interim are basically wiped clean for certain purposes. Basically, you start...
I'm not worried about that now, but the point I was making was that you forget the Democrats because naturally they're going to say nasty things, right, or less nice things about a Republican, but the Republicans themselves, chewed on him, and I'm not talking about the guys that he was running against. I'm talking about the Paul Ryans of the world and McConnells of the world. They're not my idols, but the point is they questioned his temperament and suitability for the job.
Well, I think this issue about what this means for each party is something that I think we can get to there. So let's hold that. Yes, Bob.
I've said this before, I'm not enthusiastic about Mr. Trump, and I held my nose and voted for Hillary, but I have been amused, kind of sad, but amused at the mewing and whining of the press. I switched around channels last night and watched a lot of PBS, which I tend to watch and like, but again, as things developed, it was amusing to listen to that. Also, just walking in here, there was a fellow who I have to assume is a Dartmouth professor, and a woman who might have been a Dartmouth professor, standing, talking, and he was declaring quite loudly on various points, including that this is the negative of democracy. And I chuckled to myself, though I'm sorely disappointed in the results and so on, but again, it's a lot of the commentary in this group has been from the beginning. This is impossible now.
Marjorie?
Not just in the job situation do we need to look forward and be realistic and not base our ideas on stereotyped ideas about employment. But where we have a tendency to stereotype people, that usually doesn't work out well. And in this case, we all assumed, I was included in this, we all believed that brown and black-skinned people were going to vote as a bloc for the Democrat. And it didn't happen. And the polls didn't show that clearly either. But what happened is many Hispanics and black people voted for Trump. And I think that maybe we have to remind ourselves that stereotyping doesn't work ever.
Further comments? Anybody who hasn't spoken? Laura?
Yeah, I think that Trump had these repeatable sound bites that lit people on fire, and even though they didn't make a lot of sense, like build a wall and who's going to pay for it, and he'd have whole crowds going, make the vote. But these were repeat, lock her up. And even this swamp comment that you made just a minute ago, this caught people and stuck with people, and they were asking me, well, what does Hillary stand for? And people would be blank. And so maybe there was some genius there in whoever writes the speeches or comes up with these sound bites.
No?
I think right from the start, we sort of laughed Trump out of it. I mean, I don't think anybody thought that he would be the last one standing among the 17. Nobody took it seriously. Nobody really fought back on some of those awful things that he was saying. I think they thought some great cream would rise to the top and he would be defeated.
Well, I know a couple of things, and we may have already said this in earlier classes. This is the third of a group of 3 programs that I was study leader for. The first was a year ago in the fall. The second was in the spring, and this has been the third. And at the beginning of the very first class last fall, we took a poll. Some of you were there. About who you thought was going to win the primaries, going to be the nominees. And at that point, Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton won by a landslide. And then we did the same thing in the spring, and nobody picked Donald Trump. His name didn't appear in the equation. And in the primaries, although his name appeared, you know, again, he was nowhere in that. So clearly, he was underestimated in virtually every possible way. Somebody who hasn't spoken. John.
You haven't spoken. No.
I think as the campaign, you know, exposed a lot of garbage that Hillary had been engaged in. It was like a tsunami. It kept building up, and I think even the diehard people convinced that Hillary was a woman to be the next savior of America could not look the other way. It just came on top of them, and they said, "Look, that's it. We were wrong.
Well, there's no doubt that change. There's no doubt that she was moving a lot of baggage, absolutely, and the email story just kept building. I mean, WikiLeaks did those dumps over the last 4 to 6 weeks. We had the whole Comey episode, which was in and out, and long before that, she had this extensive record that people were obviously concerned about. Other comments? Yes, sir.
Have we become too permissive? I mean, I think I don't want my president being talking to...
Have we become too permissive?
Permissive?
In our morals and everything. I mean, this is ridiculous when a man that is the president of the United States used the language that kids saw on TV and his disrespect and degrading of women. I mean, why he even got a vote is beyond me. I think we just lost it.
Jay-Z at her concert. Did you hear that language?
Yeah.
That was at Hillary Clinton's, and she got up there and gave him a big hug.
Yes, ma'am.
I heard a good line last night that Trump, that the political elites and the anti-Trump people took what he said literally, but didn't take him seriously, where his supporters took what he said not literally, but took him seriously. So when you talk about language and the things that they said, that's why they're able to laugh off the things he said, but take him seriously.
Yes.
I don't think Trump was underestimated. What was underestimated was the angst and the unhappiness of the American public.
Okay.
No one quite understood that. And even our leaders in Congress, Republican leaders in Congress don't understand that. I think it's going to be very interesting when Congress reassembles next year under Trump. What's going to happen.
So one of the things, and somebody's already raised this question, but I think it's a very interesting one. If people are so concerned about draining the swamp and making change, then why do we send the same people back year after year after year after year, and we make the change at the top? And, you know, I think that's as I say, I think that's a very interesting question. It's the old story. If you talk to most people, anywhere, I think, in the country, and you begin to talk about Congress, and they say, oh, my God, what a terrible thing, blah, 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 blah. But I love my congressman, who's just as much a part of the problem as all the other 438 geniuses. So why is this? And I don't have an answer to that question. It will be very interesting to see what happens when Mr. Trump goes to Washington. That would be a nice time. There may be one. So when he goes to Washington, and I think my own take is that over a relatively short period of time, the American public is going to get an opportunity to see the beginnings of what this administration is likely to look like. So, Sandy?
Before my neighbor Pete, I don't know your name in the front corner, but I think you made a fabulous point, one of the best ones, how Trump supporters didn't worry about if he do all these somewhat crazy things, like deporting all these people on the wall, but they believed in him. But I take issue, and by the way, I've been in lots of losing elections, and I'm not a sore loser. But I have to tell you, I am so personally distraught because I'm really worried about the country. Hillary, with all her warts, but there were discussions about issues, if anyone would listen. What's going to happen to climate change? What's going to happen with Social Security and Medicare? Are they going to try to privatize Social Security and Medicare? We have huge issues out there. So the election's over, he won. We've got to move forward. But we have to keep an eye on those, and my only hope is that what's left of the more moderate Republicans, like Rob Portman, Dartmouth graduate, that they will be able to cross the line somewhat and help so that we can get, because these are real issues. I mean, they're not make-believe.
So I'd like to get to that as we move along here. Let's stay on the what happened. Any last-minute comments here? Yes.
But to agree with that comment, that when the Constitution being formed, people have fears that the people could be misled by an authoritarian figure or could be easily deceived, is why we needed wise men to act as electors, not the general population. We have seen here at the last debate when Trump was asked, what do you think about the problems with Medicare and Social Security? His answer was, I'm going to get rid of Obamacare. And he never came back to Medicare and Social Security, and it seems people weren't disturbed by that. They wanted this authoritarian figure to make everything nice again, and weren't worried about the details.
Yes, sir.
I just heard a quote recently, in the last week or two, that in a true democracy, people eventually get what they deserve.
I think we've heard that. Yes.
Yes, I was thinking. I can't remember if it could have been Winston Churchill who said the best argument against democracy is talking to the average American voter. 5 minutes.
Yes, I sent that email out.
Is that what
and it's
true, though.
but I think yes. No. Okay.
One quick response to the question: why do we send them back? Stop and think how we get your roads paved. I'm from the small state of Delaware. Every time we got beach replenishment, our congressmen and our senators were right there. The state of Delaware didn't pay for it. You all paid for it, but my congressman was the one that was there. When you get your roads plowed, they're the face up front, and that's why you keep sending them back, because they keep bringing things to you.
So, let's move this on to the next question, which is, and we've already had some comments, where do we go from here? By that I mean, now that Trump has been elected, and will be inaugurated on January 20th. What do we expect will happen? And how do we think this is going to play out? He has a transition team. Initially, as best I know, Chris Christie is still chairman of the transition team. He may be running it from a federal prison at some point. And on the other hand, he may not be, but there's certainly a possibility he'll be either indicted or impeached, or maybe both. But leaving that aside, there are some things we have heard, if we don't know, about Trump. One is that he has a short attention span, which everyone who's ever worked with him, pro or con, has said is absolutely the case. Two is that he relies on a very small number of people. He clearly has relied on his family up until now. No reason to believe I think that's going to change. What do we expect this administration to look like? Do we think that he's likely to try and reach across the aisle? Is he going to be able to work with Paul Ryan? Will he try and undermine Ryan? This is a deal guy. He understands working deals. That could be a good thing. But what are your thoughts about this? Yes.
I worry mostly about who is going to be pulling the strings behind him. Because I don't think he can stick to anything. I don't think he realizes what the job is that he's getting into, and he's going to pass it off to other, we don't have the say on the other people. Campaign people, I can see them trying to go along in jobs that don't have to be approved from Congress, and yet be the strings behind.
I don't know whether anybody picked this up. I actually didn't see the original speech he made, but I saw the replay. And there was a line in there that I was kind of a little surprised at. He said something to the effect about after he takes office, and for the next 2 or 3 or 4 or maybe 8 years. And I said to myself, why would he say 2 years? I have no idea why he would say that. But query. Is he going to get bored with this the way he gets bored with a lot of his business situations? I have no idea about that. I just thought it was kind of an odd turn of phrase when you're accepting the job.
He has the Congress, the House and the Senate for 2 years. He may not have it for 4, may not have it for 8.
That's a possibility. That's a possibility.
Often, that's when change gets done, the first 2 years, and then, the proverbial flip up hits the fan, because you got Obamacare and the stimulus package, and that's about it.
So some of you may wonder why what this thing is up here. But I think we're at a point now where we can at least talk about it. There's obviously been some concern or some question about the idea of having a single party which controls basically all the branches of government. That is to say, the presidency and both houses of Congress. So this is an interesting chart, and I'll run it for you, but this shows, we'll go back to 1900, and it shows the years that either a Democrat or a Republican controlled all 3 branches of Congress. Here in 2005, you see W in between 3 and 5 here during Iraq. And then, as we run this down, we go through the notice here in the Clinton years. There was just 1 year where he had both houses of Congress here, and then going all the way here through Bush and Reagan. This didn't happen. Reagan, before Reagan, with Carter, he had the House for a couple of years, and then running back down. So JFK and Johnson. This led to some important legislation under Johnson. Note here that Ike had to deal with Democratic majorities, Truman, and then, of course, if we go back to Roosevelt, then, whoop, I think I lost it. Sorry about that. So look at these Roosevelt years. And when Roosevelt first came into office, there were Republican majorities, but obviously the way the country moved. And then here in the 20s, you see that through these Republican administrations, these were all Republican majorities. And going back even further to the beginning of the 1900s, again, through McKinley and Teddy Roosevelt. So the point of this is to say that this is not an unusual situation. What is unusual is the gentleman who will be taking the position and the unknown quantity that he brings to the table because of his lack of political experience and the fact that I think that no one, at least no one I've seen or heard, has been able to indicate what Trump's positions are likely to be on a whole host of issues. And we've had a couple of people who have suggested this. Without trying to come up with a lengthy list, or without trying to make suggestions today that may or may not bear any relevance to the future, I would suggest to you that there are a couple of things that have come down from key people, and several from Trump himself, about things that he is likely to try and do very early on. One, Obamacare is history. Well, okay, Obamacare is history. They probably have the votes to do that. Query, what's going to replace Obamacare? And are 10 or 15 or 20 million people going to be back without health insurance?
Right.
I have no idea. Two, Dodd-Frank, history. That'll be very early on in their agenda. Three, Social Security and Medicare. There's no question. This is very high on Speaker Ryan's agenda. And again, I have no idea where they're going with this in terms of private savings accounts and whole series of other things. But I think those are areas, and only a few areas, to be concerned about. The Supreme Court is another interesting, maybe more than interesting situation, because if there are a number of other justices who retire or otherwise leave the court, then we're talking about a whole new ball game for the court, and the balance between liberal and conservative justices will be altered for a generation, at least a generation. George?
I think the Democrats, I think we can expect the Democrats to use the only tool they have, and that's the filibuster in the Senate.
Chuck Schumer.
Well, Schumer's definitely going to have his work cut out for him. He'll probably be the most important person for the Democrats in Congress. But this is going to be, this is going to be a tough job. I think that there's an open question. I don't know that this is so, but it is not inconceivable that this whole social network of programs that has been developed going back really to FDR, and then that has come through the Johnson administration, and many of these programs, not all, with support from moderate and middle-of-the-road Republicans, may now be up for grabs. And many of those programs may disappear, food stamps, all kinds, there are dozens of these programs. And so as a way to save tax dollars, and as a way to make a statement about, I heard it last night, forget which, I don't remember who said it, but the point was made that we're not, I want to remember how it was said, we want to eliminate welfare, which is an old rallying call, and be sure, not be sure, and give everybody a job so that they can earn their own way. But of course what happens is you eliminate welfare, you have no programs for anybody to get a job, and so you're creating a situation which is even worse than the situation you started. Yes?
Can you say something positive about all this?
Well, I've just started. Yes.
Sorry. I heard Trump say this morning he wanted to fix the schools and the cities and the highways and the bridges and all this infrastructure stuff. And of course what Congress is going to say is, how do you pay for it? There goes the social programs.
Well, there's been an infrastructure bill in Congress for years. Obama introduced a major one, and the Republicans refused to pass it. Not because they didn't want it, but because they didn't want Obama to get credit. So an infrastructure program is a possibility to respond to your comment. But I think that, and that would be a very useful, and would create a lot of jobs. So I think that's a possibility. I'm sorry?
Trump has also promised to take care of the veterans.
Could she talk louder, or could you repeat it?
Trump has promised to take care of the veterans.
Yes.
So, again, I think that's an issue that gets moved from administration to administration to administration. Everybody promises to do this, and apparently, I certainly am no expert on this, but apparently the problem isn't so much on the policy as it is on the implementation. For reasons that I'm not clear about, these hospitals just don't operate in an effective and efficient mode. There are some wonderful doctors, etc., but there are many veterans who simply fall through the cracks. And as I understand it, there are certain mental and other conditions that are not appropriately covered, a phrase that I made up, but are not covered, and those veterans are unable to get that kind of care elsewhere. So this is a continuing problem. I've got no idea what Trump means by all of that.
But it seems like it would be a social program.
Andrea?
One of the things I've been wondering about is all these promises that he made to get elected, but if in 2 years he hasn't gotten the manufacturing back or the coal back or taking care of the vets, you know, any of these things, what's the reaction going to be of his base?
So, let me ask you, are we going to build a wall?
No.
NFW. There is no way that there was going to be a wall. It ain't happening. He may build some fences.
We're building fences now.
And we've been building fences for years. But we're not going to have a great big beautiful wall with a great big beautiful door that the Mexicans are going to pay for.
I'd probably fall over anyway.
So, I think, so that's number one. Number two, what about this ban on Muslims? What's going to happen with that? Number three, are we really going to pick up 12 million immigrants in buses and cart them out of the country?
No.
I mean,
No.
I would be very surprised.
So what is going to go to jail?
So, well, that's another thing. The whole question about how he might want to treat Hillary, because I think there's a factor in Congress that definitely wants to continue these investigations. And so, you know, there's a whole other way to spend money that I think is still a question. Maybe he would have the courtesy and good sense to try and put those things aside. At the moment, I think it's a complete unknown. And as his relationship is with Congress, because I just don't know. Well, the whole issue of the Supreme Court is, in my view, is, you know, it's not easy to find a case to bring to the court that is a direct reversal of a decision like Roe v. Wade. But if we find ourselves with 2 or 3 conservative new justices, I can promise you that the Roberts Court will find a way to get cases to the court that can overturn a lot of those kinds of decisions. And I think that's part of the name of the game. So that's another unknown. That doesn't happen overnight, and it's conceivable the gains that have been made very recently with same-sex marriage, with LGBT rights, those things could be out the door. You know, the Supreme Court has reversed itself on many occasions over the years. And so there's no reason to believe that these decisions are written in granite any more than the earlier decisions were written in granite. Other thoughts on this? Well, let's take a break here. Oh, Mary.
Do you think anybody will notice the climate change going on?
Climate change. Well, isn't there one? So I think, I can't think, well, and maybe some of you can. I can't think of a single influential Republican who has any interest in climate change. There may be some, but I can't think of it. So I think climate change is off the board. It ain't going to happen. I think that this accord we just signed, and was it Paris we signed that accord? Forget about it. I mean, you know, not happening. We're not going. And
Even if Florida wades around in deep water?
well, Florida's moving around in knee-deep water anyway.
Some of those people are going to suddenly wake up and say, okay, no.
well, by that time they'll be up to water in years. So I don't think climate change is that's so far down the list of concerns for the Republican Party that I don't think it's sealed. Yeah.
Do you think the gun bill is null and void?
The gun bill. Oh, Second Amendment. I mean, no, the Second Amendment will be squared. You know, Second Amendment squared. We're not seeing any activity on guns in the Congress. Absolutely not.
What about war?
War. Let's not go there.
Let's take a break.
Let's take a break. Let's settle down. I'll try and lower my voice and have some cider. So, can we reconvene?
Great presentation.
Can I say something positive? So, I think a number of you saw, at least I saw, a news article to the effect that the Canadian immigration site crashed sometime either early this morning or whatever. They were overwhelmed with requests for information.
My daughter had a friend from grad school who's Canadian, and she put a post on this morning that said, "I'm Canadian and I'm single."
Yes, ma'am.
What do you think he'll do about trade agreements?
Well, I mean, again, I don't know, but what I hear, what I've gathered is two things. One, basically he doesn't like them, and two, they're all bad deals for us. So maybe there's an opportunity to renegotiate these deals. I mean, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, it stands this high off the floor. I don't think anybody's really read it, but I don't know. And the NAFTA thing, which Mr. Pence, led through Congress, and, by all accounts, has been more favorable than unfavorable. So I think those are all open questions. And I think it's a question of his, how he's going to approach those, who is going to be in charge of that. Certainly not him. So I don't know. I think it's very hard to imagine at this point.
Wait, excuse me, can people, no, I don't have a comment. People can't hear some of the questions.
Okay, I will try and repeat the question.
I can hear a pin drop.
All right.
There's a lot of talk of him relying on Pence for
Yes.
the areas in which he has no expertise.
So I think, again, I don't know, but there was conversation back when he was vetting VPs that he had approached Kasich, for example, and basically said, look, you run the government and I'll be president. That was essentially what the comment was. Maybe he made that same pitch to Pence. Of course, making the pitch and working it out are two very different things. I just don't know. I think the style will be different from anything we have ever seen. That doesn't mean that it's good or bad. It'll just be different. So, I think when he realizes what's involved, I think he's going to be in for a major surprise.
Yeah, I think the least of his problems is his attention span.
That's our problem.
Seriously, when you think of the deep crime that the Fed office is, his ego, there has not been a president in the last 50 years that just literally doesn't get crushed. And that's going to happen. It's independent of party. There's too much media.
Yeah. Well, if his hair turns white, that'll be interesting. So let's move on to the impact on the parties, because I think this is another one of these kind of interesting questions. we were talking all along about what the impact of this election could be or would be on the GOP. And you remember that in 2012, Reince Priebus ordered this autopsy on the Republican Party, and they decided they had to do all these things, which of course basically Trump ripped up and threw away, not literally, but by his comments, and now that he's won. So what does this mean for the party? Does this mean that they're going to ignore what the autopsy said? Does this mean that they're going to, that Trump is going to go out and communicate, not only to the country, but to the world, in a way that he's used to communicating? What will happen with Ryan, with Priebus, and with the rest of the GOP? Any comments on that? I mean, it's a puzzle. Who used to say that? Somebody. Yes.
It's interesting to hear Paul Ryan respond to the election. And I said,
it was interesting to hear what Paul Ryan had to say.
and I think he was really fumbling with his words because he really didn't know how to cover himself, but also the obvious winner of the election. So I think for a lot of the Republicans, that's going to be a problem, just like I think for the Dems. It's a new game.
New game. Yes.
So I think if you look at the elites, basically, of the world, have really dropped the ball. And I think both parties have to realize that it's an echo chamber if the elite talks to itself. And I think you're finding that in both parties, the elites are talking to themselves, they don't care, and they don't know how to, apparently.
Drop the ball.
Reach out and try to do something for people who are behind the eight ball. I was reminded when Maynard talked about the veterans. For years we talked about doing a better job with the veterans, and who better deserves a break than the veterans. And while we're at it, people with jobs that are paying $12 an hour also.
Yes.
Two comments. One is no one's mentioned Brexit yet, which followed a similar pattern that Trump used to his road to victory.
Okay, so go ahead.
Again, the leaders, it's complex, but the leaders following some policies that Trump has played against. This immigration, for example, into Europe that Angela Merkel has endorsed. Not well received in some places, including in Britain. But the second comment, how are we sure that Ryan will be the Speaker of the House?
Well, I think we're not sure. He's indicated that he plans to run. I think Mr. Trump, I have no idea how Trump will respond to that. There probably will be a meeting or two between the two of them. There may be others present. I just don't know. And I think your point about Brexit is very interesting. There were comments after the Brexit vote about the possible impact on the election, which most pundits poo-pooed and said, no, there's really no relationship. Now, those of you who have followed it may know that the court in the high judge, chief judge in Britain has ruled that this ain't happening unless Parliament approves it. Yeah. Well, this sent shockwaves through England, and my guess is this is a long way from happening.
And the Scottish Parliament has said, we want to vote on it ourselves.
So, I think that it's hard to believe that they would have gone through what they went through without kind of checking with their lawyer, but I can understand why they don't want to check with their lawyer. So, but I would say, in addition to your point, which I think is a very good one, that in the coming year, both France and Germany are going to have presidential elections. And those elections are going to have candidates who are going to replicate Trump's posture his attitude, his positions, query. Is this a, this so-called populism, a term which I think is inappropriate, but nevertheless, it's a term that's now come into vogue. Is this going to sweep across Europe? And are we going to find ourselves one of a whole bunch of quote-unquote democracies that are just part of this action or reaction to what is happening in the world?
You asked about what happens to the parties. I think this is going to be a great time to be a Democrat, because the organization, as we've known it, is going to fall apart, or is already fallen apart. I think the Democratic National Committee is going to be searching for leadership. The Clintons are no longer going to be able to play a major role. The Obamas, because I think some of the defeat rubs off on him, will probably not play a major role. So it's going to be a whole new game with all new players, and I think that could be very exciting. On the Republican side, on the Republican side, it's exactly the same thing. I think, based on what Trump has done and the way he's performed, I think he wants to do something impressive, something huge as president, and he's going to let somebody else worry about the party. I don't think that's his goal. I think his goal is to accomplish something as president, and not necessarily. And maybe it's Pence, maybe it's Ryan.
Further thought on the party, yes, John.
Going back some period, his CEO of the campaign, Bannon.
Yes.
He was trying to put a bullet in Paul Ryan's head, and I would be amazed if, as a result of that, I'm sure Bannon's going to claim a lot of credit for getting Trump over the goal line, that if he doesn't want to have some big impact on what happens.
Mm-hmm.
In which case, if I were Ryan, I'd fear for my job.
Emma?
This is a person that worries me a great deal, and that whole alt-right.
Mr. Bannon?
Yes.
Well, his background is worrisome.
Very. And it's basically a Nazi movement.
Chief of Staff? No, he was the CEO.
Will he be Chief of Staff?
They're talking about Pence. Not Pence, Rice Priest.
Oh, I thought you were talking about Bannon.
I am, but he asked Chief of Staff.
He asked about Chief of Staff position.
Oh.
Yeah, there has been a mention of, I think it's still a little early.
What about Kelly? Kelly.
You know. Yeah.
Andrea? How do you think he's going to use his family? Because he's been
Kelly.
very reliant.
I thought you meant Kelly A.O.
Well, I think, my guess is, if I had to guess, I would say he's going to spend more nights in New York than in Washington. Fly down for the day and fly back, and charge us all for it, which I guess is perhaps expectable. And that raises another interesting question. What about that $55 million with the Republican National Committee? Is he really going to forgive that debt? I don't know. Yes.
What's going to happen to his business? Is there a law that says those businesses?
No.
Well, there's a law like, you have to show your tax returns. There's a law that says that you're supposed to put your assets in a blind trust. That has historically been cash, stocks, bonds, etc. The only businessman with any significant business assets that we've had as president was Herbert Hoover. But Hoover had basically retired when he became president. So he was not active in a company or his companies when he became president. So my guess is that Trump isn't going to do anything about this. And I would say something else, that if he did turn over, quote unquote, to the boys, and again, this is my take, they don't do anything without being sure that he says yes. So that's why they're working for him, because
yes, man.
they do what he says in any case. So,
Mayor,
yes.
could you roll that screen back up? I'd like to see.
Oh, roll it back?
Roll
Sure. You
Yes.
want to,
Yes,
is there
please.
something you wanted to, well,
Well, current.
oh, go back to the current, yes, we can do that.
Thanks.
There we are. Again, the point of this was to show that there have been a fair number of times in the last 110 years, 15, where, you know, the one party has controlled all three branches. So this is not unique. On the other hand, depending upon the personalities, it could be troubles. Yes?
I heard that if Ryan is opposed in the election for being Speaker of the House, that the Democrats might side with him versus person farther to the right and vote for Ryan, to keep Ryan.
Well, the Democrats don't vote.
Well, then why did someone...
I don't know. Basically, I mean, it's like choosing the majority leader. The party votes for their own. So I don't believe the Democrats play a role there. I don't believe they do. Well, let's move on. Who were the losers? Well, the pollsters were the losers. That's one group of losers. Boy, those guys and gals. I haven't. Nate Silver posted a very brief thing that said that, you know, we'd hear more from him a little later on. He was actually the most, the closest to, you know, the least enthusiastic about Clinton's chances. You'll remember, and I think we've mentioned this before, he said that the likelihood of Trump's winning was the equivalent of, you know, missing that 38-yard field goal, or the Cubs winning the World Series, or flipping a coin up 3 times and having it come down the same way all 3 times, which I did as soon as I saw that, and then they all came up tails, and then the Cubs won the World Series. So I should have known that this was not going the right way.
Well, the LA Times, USC, they were right on the button all along.
Well, that is correct. The LA Times and IBD were the best of the polls in that regard. And the other guys looked like, you know, they were out to lunch. So they certainly didn't do themselves. They didn't cover themselves with glory.
How
Yes.
about the media?
Okay, Francis, the media. So you want to be more specific?
Well, they really were very anti-Trump, and pro-Hillary Clinton. I mean, they've been on that bandwagon. So I'm wondering if they are considered losers now because they were so one-sided.
Well, we have media and we have media. You know, there's definitely a split in the media. We've got Fox News on the one side, which certainly isn't pro-Hillary. And we've got MSNBC, we've got CNN, we've got a whole bunch of, and we've got the major networks. So I think there was a movement, I think. I think it's arguable, at least, that in the initial stages of the Trump candidacy, that he got a tremendous amount of free publicity, that, you know, the idea, at that time it was very unusual, the idea that he would tweet in and not personally be there was kind of a novelty at that time, and I think people on both sides of the media people, on both sides were intrigued. I think they were intrigued with him, and I think he was able to utilize that to his advantage. So I definitely think the media takes a black eye in this election.
He certainly had a lot more exposure.
Yes.
I just totally disagree that they were pro-Hillary, because, again, when you mentioned about the free press he got, he would call it, CNN was saying something, he would call into the newsroom personally and tell them to ask certain questions and things like that. And it was, yes, and nonstop, and the false equivalency that they set up with to try and be balanced and just not hammer him early on what he was saying and what was really true and what wasn't, and not educating the public about what was going on. They were awful. If you watch those talking heads, it was ridiculous.
Yes, ma'am.
I spent 30 years working in the media, and first of all, the media doesn't exist. It's way too big to say the media at anything. Secondly, if you're relying on television, especially the evening news, to get a complete story on anything, think about it. You have 22 minutes to tell you the most important things that are happening in the world. And if people read newspapers and magazines, there was a ton of truth to read out there on both sides, if people took the time. Now, some people legitimately don't have time to do that because they have jobs to do and kids to take care of and things to do. But a lot of people don't do their due diligence of educating themselves, and there just is a ton of truth on both sides to read out there.
So you'll recall that we had some slides earlier in these sessions that showed the great distinction between the phrase media, breaking it down by category, for various age groups, you'll remember. And we saw that for people who were getting along, that social media was at the bottom of that list, and that the networks and print media were up here. Whereas for millennials, the networks and print media were down here, and social media was up here. And that as you crossed the grain for various age groups, and there must have been 15 categories of media. It wasn't just two. It was showing all those things. So there's a different take by different levels of the population here. And I think one of the things that, I mean, this was the first Twitter campaign. And whether it'll be Twitter or Instagram or some other thing that hasn't even been identified yet, I have no idea. But the traditional forms of media, I think, are becoming less and less important as we move.
Well, one more thing. I think that the legacy medias that established the networks and the major newspapers and magazines have always done a poor job of covering the entire country, you know, especially the middle parts, the parts we call the flyover states, because they don't want to spend the money to get there. So I think when you're talking to people mostly in cities and on the coast, you're going to get an impression of the country that is not representative of the whole country.
Further thoughts?
That's what I meant about the elites talking to themselves. The elites are talking to themselves on these, you know, and media, I mean, the social media is the people talking. And I always go back to this, that if we're going to have all this facts out there, all this, what's going on, you got to have in your head how I can think this through and figure out what's really going on here, what's a pile of crap, in my language. So I go back to education, public education is a key problem in this country.
Yes.
We've talked at various times, and it was talked about a lot, the uneducated versus the educated voter, college educated.
Yes.
And this came up frequent. In fact, I believe that the uneducated females, many of them voted for Trump as well as the uneducated males. Am I right?
Yes.
But in any case, do we know what percentage of the entire electorate is college educated?
I think, I can't give that to you off the top of my head. I think we had a number for that.
I mean, is it 50%?
It was what?
50, nowhere near 50%.
No, it wasn't, but it's somewhere between 35 and 40.
So we're, I want to say we're doubling down as American, but maybe this is why we, people rely on the little, bites they get and don't read the papers and newspapers.
Well, that number has been trending up. That is to say, the number of college-educated people is trending up. And my own take is the fact that they're college-educated doesn't necessarily mean they're all that smart. So, so further thoughts here. Any other? We've talked about possible losers that don't have to be groups. They could be individuals. I mean, clearly, the Clintons have not come off well here. And, I suspect that they will basically go back to the foundation and, we will finally see the end of that era.
Until Chelsea comes
which is being, well.
What did she say?
Well, she said until Chelsea comes along. I would be surprised. I think my guess is that she's been close to, she's been close and probably doesn't want to kind of go through that kind of difficulty with the family and all that stuff.
Another potential loser is big money. I found it interesting that I don't know how much money Hillary ended up spending, but well over $100 million.
Oh, well.
Maybe
no, it's over. No, the number with PACs and stuff is close. It's $1 billion.
So $1 billion to come in a close second. And how much did Trump spend?
I don't know, $8.48.
Well, I mean,
no, it was a lot less.
Not very much.
No, and that was a major shift, exactly. because this whole Citizens United thing, that decision by the court had sparked these PACs and super PACs and 501c4s and all of that stuff going, undisclosed money, dark money. So I think that that's a very interesting comment.
One could argue that Trump's victory is the first step toward doing away with the United decision and getting big money out of it.
Well, I'm not sure I'd argue that, but it is interesting how he was able to manipulate the funding, and he did go out actually and raise a fair amount of money, which he said he wouldn't do, but he did. And they spent that money in the last 6-8 weeks, a lot of it. But I do think that's an interesting point. And this spike, certainly in this election, will see some kind of a downturn because of his use of funds. Yeah, Alan.
Oh, but they said that they did not add in the money, all the free advertising he got from the media during the primary time.
Well, that's true. They don't.
They, when that was added in, he spent a lot more money. And you don't know how many bills he still has out that he's going to go and say.
His airplane.
His airplane.
Brian.
I mean, going back to the big money and on a spend down level, I mentioned once before about the amount of information came from my mailbox for Kelly Ayotte.
Yes.
We ended up with 53 pieces of negative out-of-state money for her over the course of the election.
So I think that point is goes with Pete's point, right, to the extent that while Trump didn't spend perhaps as much as the Romney campaign spent, that down, as you went down the ticket, that those numbers were higher than ever. So to that extent, there's a trade-off there. Bob?
It would seem to me that one of the losers would be the
Supreme Court decision in that there was a great deal of concern that the conservative money would buy the election, and a great deal more money was spent, big money, for Democrats, and as Pete has pointed out, to no avail. It would seem to me that the anxiety that was expressed that the Koch brothers were going to run the world and so on has not proved true, and it's unlikely that there'll be a great deal of legitimacy to the one of the issues that was on most of the on the Democratic is we want to reverse that decision, and that ain't going no place anytime soon.
Well, Bob, the Koch brothers made a decision not to support Trump, basically. I mean, that was their decision. I mean, and I haven't seen numbers on this, but it was my understanding that they were spending serious money on senatorial, congressional, and local elections. So I don't know what those numbers are, but they're very substantial. I think what they did was they took the money that, you know, they might have spent on a different candidate's campaign and spread it around to a greater number of states.
I think another loser would be the, I think by latest count, 10 Republicans who had already planned to launch their presidential campaign tomorrow.
For 2020,
yeah.
Right. Yes.
I think another thing is had their turnout. And I heard something, I think it was from a Trump person, that they had 6,000 people in Pennsylvania out knocking on doors. In Pennsylvania, you know, they won Pennsylvania, and that was a key state to win. And it wasn't necessarily money, it actually was organization. And they said Hillary only had about 300 out. At first I didn't even believe it, but that's what he said.
There's like 300 people in Philadelphia, I think.
Those numbers don't make sense to me, but because one of the things I had heard was that you know, Philadelphia and Pennsylvania was well organized and orchestrated, and I was very surprised to see that Pennsylvania turned at the end.
That was the biggest surprise of all.
I think so, Martin.
In Pennsylvania, the big difference, the city produced the same amount of excess Democratic votes.
Right, 450,000.
450 that the ward leaders
predicted,
but the big change was that initially it was thought that in the suburbs surrounding Philadelphia that white college-educated women were voting much more for Hillary than they were for Donald. And in the end, the percentages were about the same as the votes for Romney and Trump were about the same. It was like 47%. It was an equal.
Yeah,
it was equal. 47% for Hillary.
But it was the suburban vote that Obama had gotten that didn't come out in the same way.
They were expecting to leave the metropolitan Philadelphia area, including the big four suburbs, of which we lived in one of them, with an excess of 550 or 600,000,
which never happened,
and never happened.
Right. Further thoughts. So as we wind this down, are there any concluding thoughts, comments, questions about something we may not have covered, things that are left unsaid? Yes, sir.
Looking at the positive aspects,
Good.
That the 2020 election will be very important, that the Democrats will sleep at the wheel in 2010, and weren't thinking that the governors and people in power will do the redistricting after the census of 2010. One can see the House of Representatives slipping from
2018
in 2010.
No, but you said 2020, but there's a 2018 election.
Right.
Where the Republicans, these midterm elections in recent years, the Republicans have been very strong, and the Democrats have been a little asleep at the wheel, which is one of the reasons why the Republicans control 31 or 2 of the state houses, and I think, you know, an equal number, if not more, of the state legislatures. So I think this is a continuing concern for the parties. And this goes back to the whole issue of redistricting and gerrymandering. You know, there's a whole other course on that issue. Yes.
Yeah, I'm honestly still feeling a bit dazed since last night, staying up watching all this. And what I wonder is how the two parties are going to start reshaping, because I think there's going to be so much scrambling going on. And I think the true conservatives in the Republican Party are probably just as disappointed with the way things are going. Well, you know, maybe not quite as much as people in the Democratic Party. And I wonder who will be the center of all the scrambling that's going to be going on in the Democratic Party. Where will the leadership be? Will it be the real progressive like Bernie? Or is there someone more centrist that will take responsibility? I don't see it yet.
Yep. Well, I think it remains to be seen, yes.
What will happen with the Trump University case?
That's a very interesting question.
What does
That case is in the Federal District Court in California, and that's a nice question. You know, will they call Mr. Trump to testify? I don't know.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
It was a question about the Trump University case, where he's being charged with, he personally is being charged with fraud and various other counts for the activities.
I have a question. What is mandatory for a president-elect to show? Will we see, is it mandatory that he show his tax returns?
No.
Okay.
So when he hasn't, and my take is, we ain't gonna see it. You know, we put that off, you know, in the best way he could, which was very effective, and we won't see it. I mean, I'm sure we will see it. So,
well, the one thing I was going to say that I think is positive is that he seemingly has a much better chance of getting a jobs program, you know, infrastructure bank going than Obama ever did, because he might be able to get the Republicans to act. And if nothing else happens, I mean, I fear for lots of things, the Supreme Court and everything else, because quite honestly, he's not my, you know, Donald is not my guy, but if the jobs program gets going, it could do a lot of good for a lot of people and the country, because you know, you get more people working, you get taxes, revenues going up. That's not necessarily.
And if you can get a program going and it's a major one, then maybe that will lead to other things. I think that's at least the hope. Over there. Bob? And then
It seems to me that one of the things that is of great concern and that's relevant to this topic and relevant to was how there is an enormous number of people, the supporters of Bernie and the supporters of Trump are dissatisfied individuals. And no one has put forth a credible policy for dealing with the concerns that those people, the matters that those people are concerned about. At one point in the campaign, over one weekend, both Hillary and Trump came out with their economic plans, which were pretty sketchy, but the comment that was made about those plans was, these would have been great plans in 1973, but they were irrelevant to the contemporary problems of the economy in the United States and the Western world generally. So my concern would be that neither party is going to be able to resolve these problems satisfactorily to those people who are concerned, and how will the United States respond when there's this continued failure?
Okay. Sean?
Well, I have two positives. My first positive won't begin to sound like a positive until a minute goes by. But during this whole election process, and certainly throughout the election outcome, turnout report, whatever, from last night, we started to see the areas of the country that have been affected and are disaffected. And I think if we, as a society, of Americans, have been looking and listening to what's happening to our other fellow Americans, positive of these two campaigns is that it has exposed the depth of hurt, the depth of anger, the depth of need for people really all across different walks of life and in different parts of the country. And I hope we can get over the sense that our government is supposed to fix this, because we're the people and we need to start fixing it. And sometimes it can't be the government because we don't have enough people in the government, but we don't need any more. So I think we've learned a lot about the state of our country right now, and I hope that we can take that look, not be afraid to look at that as a positive, make a list of what we need to do, and then start doing it at a grassroots level. The second positive, Maynard, has been you and this class, that your guidance through the last phases of this election has been most interesting, and I have really appreciated the participation from the rest of the class, because
Well, I thank you, and I think that I would like to say that, you know, this class has been, this has not been me, this has been us. And I have felt that the discussions that we've had have been most interesting. I think you've raised some very important questions. There's no question, and you know, that I don't have all the answers. I probably have very few of them. My goal has been to try and raise the questions and get you to talk about them. I think one of the things we've seen throughout these 8 sessions is that through the entire electoral process, from the Electoral College, through the primaries, through the conventions, through the election itself, we've got serious problems with this system.
With what?
And there are lots of organizations out there who are dealing with various aspects of them, but nobody, to the best of my knowledge, within the government or indeed within the parties, is really giving any thought to trying to find a way to move some reform through these systems. And I think the most obvious example, and it certainly isn't the only one, again, is that if Hillary does win the popular vote, that it'll be the second time in 5 elections that the winner of the popular vote has lost the election. To me, that's an anathema as to what we should be supporting in our society.
That brings up your point earlier about this attempt to get to the states, where they have a compact that they would...
Right, they would support...
And there's 21 states so far, and it seems to me there isn't ever being made there.
There is. It's just been kind of sidestepped for a couple of reasons. Did you have a comment, Barb?
Yeah, this is just sort of a final thing. As I was going to feed my meter, and a crayon sign in Carpenter Hall, it reads, "We are still stronger together you are America and it's beautiful. So somebody out there has
So-
a nice positive way.
So let me, before we adjourn, let me ask you, are you up to meeting next week?
Yeah.
Or should we pass?
Me.
Are we up to meeting? I mean, you don't have to promise, but
Is it here?
it's right here, Friday, a week from Friday, at noontime. Should we do it? Okay. The 18th at noontime. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll see you then.